There are times in our lives when we find ourselves at a crossroads, uncertain of where to go or what the future holds. Yet in those moments of uncertainty, God already knows. He sees the steps we have taken, the burdens we carry, the weariness of our souls, and the desires of our hearts. And in His infinite wisdom, He knows when it's time for us to step onto a new path. God, in His infinite wisdom and compassion, knows every fiber of our being. He knows the depths of our hearts, our thoughts, and our desires, even the ones we hide from ourselves. From the moment we were conceived, He has known us intimately, far better than we could ever know ourselves. There is a profound comfort in this, but also a challenge. It is easy to forget in the hustle and bustle of daily life that we are fully seen and understood by our Creator. Yet no thought, no dream, no worry escapes Him. He sees the struggles we face, the paths we have chosen, and more importantly, the paths we have avoided. In the Bible, we are reminded that God knows what we need even before we ask. He sees beyond our words, beyond our pleas for help, straight into the deepest longings of our souls. There are times when we may not even know what we need, but God does. We may believe we are secure where we are, that we have all we need, or that staying on our current path is the best choice. But God sees the bigger picture. He sees the road ahead, and He knows when it is time for a change. We often forget how closely God watches over us, not out of surveillance, but out of love and care. He knows when we are weary, when we are burdened, and when the path we walk is no longer the one that will lead us to the life He has planned. He sees the forks in the road long before we do. Sometimes we feel a stirring in our spirit, an unease that something needs to change. That is often God whispering to us, nudging us gently toward a new direction, a new path that will better serve His purposes for our lives. In Scripture, we are told that God searches the heart and examines the mind. He knows when we are straying, when we are clinging to things that no longer nourish our souls. He knows when the path we walk is growing darker, narrower, or leading us away from His light. But He doesn't simply observe, He acts. He invites us to follow Him, to trust His leading, to take a step into the unknown, knowing that He is with us. There are times when we feel lost, confused, unsure of where to go next. We may look for signs, for clarity, or for affirmation that we are on the right path. But God knows that sometimes what we truly need is not a confirmation of our current way, but an invitation to a new one. He knows when our hearts are restless because we are no longer where we need to be. He knows when we are yearning for more, even when we cannot articulate what that more is. God's knowledge of our hearts is not passive, it is active, full of grace and guidance. He doesn't simply know what we need, He moves to provide it. Often that provision comes in the form of a new path, one that we may not have considered or even wanted at first, but because He knows us better than we know ourselves, He leads us toward it, not with force, but with love, knowing that this new way will bring us closer to Him and to the fullness of life that He desires for us. God's plan for each of us is dynamic, not static. He doesn't intend for us to stay in one place, both spiritually and physically, indefinitely. Life is a journey, and throughout this journey, God calls us to grow, to evolve, and to change. Often, that growth requires us to walk a different path than the one we are currently on. He knows when the season of one road has ended, and when it is time for a new chapter to begin. It's a divine invitation to move, to shift, to align ourselves with a greater purpose, a purpose He has carefully crafted for us from the beginning. In the Bible, we are said to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. This teaches us that our understanding of our current situation is limited, flawed even. We might be walking a path that we believe is right, a path that feels comfortable or familiar. But God sees far beyond what we can see. Our perspective is often clouded by fear, complacency, or even pride. We may be clinging to our current circumstances, not realizing that God is calling us to something greater. His wisdom transcends our earthly reasoning. And when He calls us to a new path, He is doing so out of His perfect understanding of our needs, our potential, and His ultimate plan for our lives. Change can be uncomfortable. It disrupts the routines we have grown accustomed to. We often resist it because it requires letting go of what we know. But God, in His infinite love and grace, urges us to trust Him in these moments. When He calls us to a new path, He is not abandoning us on a journey we must walk alone. He is walking with us, leading us, just as He led the Israelites through the wilderness. There was uncertainty in that journey. There was fear, but there was also provision. God provided manna, water from the rock, and guidance in the form of a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. His leading was constant, even when the destination was unclear. In our lives, when God calls us to a new path, we might not see where it leads. We might feel lost, as though we are stepping into the unknown. But just like the Israelites, we are not alone. God is with us, guiding our steps and preparing the way ahead of us. In the Bible, we are said to forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. God is always working in our lives, creating new opportunities for growth and transformation. He asks us to release the old, the familiar, so that we can embrace the new. Sometimes the path God calls us to is difficult. It may involve sacrifice, leaving behind people or places we love, or facing challenges we never anticipated. But we can take heart in the knowledge that God's plans for us are always good. Even when the way seems hard, even when it requires us to step out in faith, God's purpose is to lead us into a future filled with hope. Letting go of the familiar is one of the hardest things we can do, especially when the path we are on seems comfortable or secure. As human beings, we naturally gravitate toward what we know, what feels safe, and what has worked in the past. We build our lives on these foundations, clinging to routines, relationships, and environments that provide a sense of stability. Yet God calls us to something deeper, something more profound. He often asks us to loosen our grip on the comfort we have created and trust Him as He leads us into the unknown. In life, we can become attached to what is familiar, even when that familiarity no longer serves us. Perhaps it's a job we've outgrown, a relationship that has become toxic, or a lifestyle that no longer reflects the values we hold dear. But because these things are familiar, we convince ourselves that they are good enough. We tell ourselves that the discomfort we feel is simply part of life, something we must endure. Yet, in these moments, God may be whispering to us, inviting us to something new, something better, but we hesitate because it means letting go of the comfort we've known. In the Bible, we are said to walk by faith, not by sight. This speaks directly to the challenge of leaving behind what is familiar. Faith requires us to step out into the unknown, trusting that God will guide us even when we can't see the entire path ahead. It requires courage because walking by faith often feels like stepping into darkness. We want to stay where it's bright, where we can see what's in front of us, but God asks us to trust that He will light the way in His perfect timing. Fear can be a powerful force in our lives, keeping us anchored to what feels safe, even when that safety is an illusion. We may fear the uncertainty of a new path, fear failure, or fear the possibility that we might lose something valuable in the process. Yet in these moments, God reminds us that He did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-discipline. He equips us with the strength we need to let go of the old and embrace the new. He asks us to trust that His plans for us are far greater than the temporary security we may find in our current situation. It's important to recognize that letting go of comfort is not the same as letting go of control. Often we cling to familiar paths because they give us a sense of control over our lives. But God reminds us that true security comes not from our ability to control our circumstances, but from our reliance on Him. In the Bible, we are said to seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. This is a reminder that when we prioritize God's will for our lives, He will provide for us in ways we could never imagine. Letting go of comfort may also mean letting go of people or environments that hold us back from God's calling. This doesn't mean abandoning relationships or commitments, but it does mean being willing to follow God, even when it leads us away from what we've always known. Abraham's story is a powerful example of this. God called him to leave his homeland, his family, and everything he had ever known to go to a place God would show him. Abraham didn't have a map or a detailed plan, but he trusted God's promise and stepped out in faith. God often works in the space beyond our comfort zone. It is in those moments of uncertainty, of stepping out into the unknown, that we grow, that our faith deepens, and that we become more attuned to his voice. While comfort might make us feel secure in the short term, it can also lull us into complacency. God's desire for us is not merely survival or contentment, but abundant life. And sometimes that requires us to trust him enough to walk away from the things that no longer serve his purpose for us. God's timing is perfect, though it rarely aligns with our own sense of urgency or impatience. We often find ourselves wanting answers immediately, solutions to our problems at the snap of a finger, or clear signs that tell us exactly what to do. But God does not operate according to our schedules or our limited understanding of time. His perspective is eternal. He sees the beginning, the end, and everything in between, knowing exactly when to move us forward and when to hold us in place. We may feel anxious, wondering why God hasn't revealed the next step, but he knows when the time is right. There's a divine rhythm to God's guidance, and we must learn to trust it. When we're eager to move forward or frustrated with a season of waiting, we must remember that God's delay is not a denial. He is often working behind the scenes in ways we cannot perceive. He is preparing the path ahead of us, moving pieces into place that we are not even aware of. In the Bible, we are said to be still and know that I am God. This stillness is not passive. It is an active surrender to his timing, a relinquishing of our desire to control the pace of our journey. God is not slow to fulfill his promises. Rather, he is patient with us, ensuring that when he leads us, we are ready to follow. God's timing is also protective. Sometimes we are eager to move on to the next thing, to take on a new challenge or step into a new opportunity, but God in his wisdom holds us back. He sees dangers or obstacles on the road ahead that we cannot. Like a loving father who slows his child's steps to avoid a fall, God guides us with care, knowing when we are ready and when we are not. He may delay our progress, not to frustrate us, but to protect us from paths that could lead to harm. In the Bible, we are said to wait on the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. This waiting is not a punishment, but a preparation, a time when God strengthens our hearts and prepares us for what is to come. When God calls us to a new path, he also prepares the way. Just as he parted the Red Sea for the Israelites, making a way where there seemed to be no way, God will make a path clear when the time is right. It may not be the path we expected, and it may not come in the time we wanted, but it will always be the right one. We are reminded in the Bible that God's ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts higher than our thought. What may seem like a delay or a detour to us is often part of God's greater plan, a plan that is for our ultimate good. In moments of doubt or frustration, it's easy to question God's timing. We may feel as though he's forgotten us, left us in the wilderness without direction, but this couldn't be further from the truth. God's timing is always purposeful. Even when we cannot see it, he uses the waiting to grow our faith, to refine our character, and to draw us closer to him. Like the Israelites in the desert, we may wander for what feels like too long, but God is always present, always providing, always guiding. Even when the next step seems unclear, he is there, preparing the way forward. God's timing also requires our obedience. When he says it's time to move, we must be ready to go. There are moments when the call to action comes suddenly, when God opens a door and we must have the faith to walk through it, trusting that he has prepared us for this moment. In the Bible, we are said to make the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. God's timing is not something to be questioned, but something to be embraced with confidence. When he calls us to step onto a new path, we must do so with faith, knowing that he has orchestrated every detail. God's guidance is always rooted in love, and his timing reflects his deep care for us. We may not understand why he leads us when he does, or why certain paths take longer than others to reveal themselves, but we can trust that his timing is never wrong. In the same way that a farmer waits for the right season to plant or harvest, God knows the exact moment when we are ready for the next step. He does not rush us, nor does he delay without reason. We may feel the weight of waiting, but God is always on time. When God calls us to a new path, it is often for the purpose of transformation. Walking with God is not meant to leave us unchanged. It is a journey of continual growth and renewal. The new path he invites us to take is not just about changing our external circumstances, but about transforming our hearts, minds, and spirits. God is deeply concerned with the kind of people we are becoming. He is always working to mold us into the image of his Son, Jesus Christ. And sometimes that requires us to step into new territories, new challenges, and new experiences that shape us in ways the old path could not. God's desire is not merely for our comfort or our temporary happiness, but for our holiness and our growth. He knows that remaining in the same place, physically or spiritually, can lead to stagnation. In the Bible, we are said to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. This renewal is often brought about when we follow God into the unknown, trusting that he is doing a new work within us. The journey on a new path brings with it the opportunity for deeper faith, stronger character, and a closer relationship with God. Each step we take in obedience to him refines us, teaches us, and draws us nearer to his heart. Transformation through faith is not an easy process. It often requires us to confront parts of ourselves that we would rather avoid. The old path may have allowed us to hide behind familiar habits, old attitudes, or unresolved issues, but the new path exposes those things in the light of God's truth. It's on this new journey that God often brings to the surface the things in our hearts that need healing, correcting, or surrendering. The challenges and uncertainties we face are not obstacles to our growth, but are often the very tools God uses to transform us. He uses these moments to strip away the layers of fear, pride, or doubt, revealing a heart that is more aligned with his will. In the Bible, we are said to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, and to be made new in the attitude of your minds. The new path God sets before us requires a shedding of the old ways of thinking, old habits, old sins, so that we can walk in the fullness of life that God has for us. This is a transformative process, one that takes place over time as we submit to his leading. It is through this journey that we begin to see ourselves more clearly, not through the lens of the world, but through the lens of God's love and purpose for us. Transformation also comes through the challenges that new paths bring. When we step into unfamiliar territory, we are forced to rely on God in ways we may not have before. The discomfort, the uncertainty, and even the trials that come with a new journey push us to lean on God's strength rather than our own. In doing so, our faith deepens. We learn to trust God more fully, not because the path is easy, but because we experience his faithfulness in the midst of it. He provides for us, guides us, and sustains us, and in the process, we are transformed into people who trust him more completely. God's new path is also transformative because it often brings new opportunities to serve him and others. As we grow in faith and character, we are equipped to step into roles and responsibilities that we may not have been ready for on the old path. The new journey opens doors for us to minister to others, to be a light in dark places, and to use our gifts in ways that glorify God. It is on this new path that we often discover the depth of our calling and the purpose that God has for our lives. We become instruments of his love, grace, and truth in ways we never imagined. In the Bible, we are said to walk in the newness of life. This newness is not simply about leaving the past behind, but about stepping into the future with a renewed sense of purpose and identity in Christ. The transformation that comes from walking with God on a new path is profound. It changes the way we see ourselves, the way we see others, and the way we see God. We become more patient, more loving, more forgiving, and more courageous. We become people who reflect the character of Christ in our words, actions, and thoughts. Ultimately, the new path God calls us to walk is one of transformation, not just of our external circumstances, but of our very souls. Each step we take in faith, each moment of trust, each trial endured brings us closer to the people God created us to be. We are being made new, not by our own efforts, but by the power of God working within us. One of the most comforting truths about walking the path God has called us to is that we never walk it alone. In every moment, every trial, and every new step, God's presence is with us, guiding, strengthening, and comforting us. His promise to be with us is a constant reassurance, one that should fill us with peace and courage even when the path ahead is unclear or daunting. There's an undeniable sense of comfort that comes from knowing we are not left to navigate this journey by ourselves. God goes before us, walks beside us, and even carries us when we are too weary to continue. In moments of doubt or fear, we may wonder if God is truly with us, especially when the way seems difficult. It's easy to feel isolated when we are facing challenges or when life takes an unexpected turn. Yet God reassures us in His Word that He will never leave us or forsake us. This is not a promise made lightly. It's a fundamental truth about God's character. He is a God who desires intimacy with His children, walking alongside us through every season of life. Whether we are in the valley of shadows or standing on the mountain of victory, His presence remains steadfast. God's companionship is not passive, it is active and purposeful. He is not simply an observer of our journey, but an active participant, guiding our steps, providing wisdom, and opening doors that we might not have noticed on our own. In the Bible, we are said to fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. This promise is a reminder that His presence dispels fear and replaces it with confidence. When we feel uncertain about the path ahead, we can rest in the knowledge that God's presence is our guide, illuminating the way even when the destination is unclear. Sometimes we may feel as though we've lost our way, or that the path God has called us to is too difficult to bear. In these moments, we can take heart knowing that God is our strength. We don't have to rely on our own abilities to persevere. God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. When we stumble, He lifts us up. When we feel overwhelmed, He carries our burdens. His presence is not just comforting, it is empowering. It enables us to keep moving forward, even when the road ahead seems impossible. The Bible reassures us that even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. This isn't just a poetic sentiment, but a profound truth about the nature of God's presence in our lives. He is with us in our darkest moments, providing the courage and strength we need to face whatever comes our way. When the journey feels overwhelming, we can lean into His presence, knowing that He will not abandon us, even when the path feels uncertain. God's presence also brings peace. In a world filled with chaos and uncertainty, the peace that comes from knowing God is with us is invaluable. It is a peace that transcends our circumstances, a peace that guards our hearts and minds when the world around us feels unstable. We don't have to worry about the twists and turns of the road ahead because we know that God is in control. His presence reminds us that He is the author of our journey and nothing we encounter is beyond His power or care. As we walk the new path God has set before us, we are not only accompanied by His presence, but also guided by His Spirit. In the Bible, we are said to be led by the Spirit of God. The Holy Spirit is our constant companion, offering wisdom, conviction, and direction as we navigate the complexities of life. When we are unsure of which way to turn, the Spirit nudges us, guiding our hearts and minds toward God's will. This divine guidance is another profound way that God's presence manifests in our lives. The presence of God is not just a source of strength and guidance, it is also a source of joy. There is joy in knowing that we are never alone, that the Creator of the universe is intimately involved in our lives. This joy sustains us in times of trial and gives us hope for the future. It is a joy that comes from being in communion with the one who knows us fully and loves us deeply. In the Bible, we are said to rejoice in the Lord always. This call to joy is rooted in the assurance of God's presence, a reminder that no matter what we face, we can rejoice because He is with us. Ultimately, the path God calls us to is not one we walk in isolation. His presence is a constant companion, a source of strength, peace, and joy. No matter how challenging the journey may be, we can trust that God is with us every step of the way. His presence is the foundation of our faith, the anchor that keeps us steady when the winds of life threaten to pull us off course. In every moment, we are held by His love, sustained by His grace and guided by His wisdom. In every season of life, God calls us to new paths, not to burden us, but to guide us into deeper purpose, transformation, and growth. As we step into the unknown, we may face uncertainty, discomfort, and fear, yet His presence is a constant source of strength and comfort. He walks with us, guiding each step, illuminating the way, and ensuring that we are never alone. The journey may be challenging, but it is through these new paths that we experience profound spiritual growth and come to trust God more fully. His timing is perfect, His plans are good, and His presence is unwavering. As we let go of the familiar and embrace the new, we find that God's purpose for our lives unfolds in ways far greater than we could have imagined, leading us toward a life filled with peace, joy, and faith.